Okay, so what's the point? Um, this is something that's really important to me that I do in a lot of my advanced work is when one story mentions another story, I like to go find out what's in that other story to see if there's a connection between the two stories. And in this case, there really is. So, giant poem called the Aeneid. The main character Aeneas leaves his home and he to found a new empire by defeating barbarians and starting a new civilization. Along the way, he meets Dido in Carthage, and they fall in love, but he ditches her. Carthage, hundreds of years later, is renamed Tunis. That is where the king in this play was dropping his daughter Claribel off, and on the way back from the wedding, they got shipwrecked on the island. Prospero shipwrecked him. So let's see what happens next, because this gets real. I know this is advanced. This is really advanced. And it's semester, everybody's tired. Nobody wants to hear this, but it's interesting. All right. So they discuss Tunis, sir, was Carthage. Carthage, I assure you, Carthage. His word is more than the miraculous harp. They're making fun of him for talking too much. He hath raised the wall and houses too, meaning he sort of conjures it up. He's talking too much. What impossible matter will he make easy next? I think he will carry this island home in his pocket and give it to his son for an apple, and sowing kernels of it in the sea, bringing forth more islands. They're just making fun of the old man for talking too much because they're in a bad mood because they're shipwrecked. Ay, wine, good term. Sir, we were talking that our garments now seem as fresh as they were when we were at the Tunis at the marriage of your daughter, who is now queen. He's repeated himself, because again, he's an old man, and so he's like trying to be happy, but he's also like an old guy, and he's a little dumb. He's supposed to be, he's like old people, he gets a little lost, so he just repeats it again. He brings it up, he brings it up again. And the rarest that e'er came you, bait, I beseech you, widow Dido. Oh, they're still talking about this joke. The reason they're mad about it is because they think it's stupid that he calls her the widow Dido, since widow is a person whose husband has died, and Aeneas was not actually married to her. Also, she wasn't really widowed because Aeneas didn't die; he just ditched her, and so it's a kind of complicated reference there. Okay, so let's take a look at what's going on down here. They keep talking about the clothes. Is not, sir, my doublet as fresh as the first day I wore it? I mean, in a sort, that sort was well fished for. When I wore it at your daughter's marriage. He keeps repeating himself because he's an old man and he's getting a little lost. So Alonso is the king, and he's upset. He says, you cram these words into mine ears against the stomach of my sense, meaning stop talking about this. I don't want to talk about this anymore. I would I had never married my daughter there, for coming thence my son is lost, and in my road she too, who was so far from Italy removed, I ne'er again shall see her. So he says, stop talking about that wedding, because that wedding was terrible, because I lost my daughter, because I gave her away at the wedding, and she now lives in another continent. And also, on the way back, we had a shipwreck, and my son is dead. His son isn't dead, but he thinks his son is dead. And so he says, please don't talk about this anymore. I don't want to hear about this. I'm very depressed. Um, uh, and he says, um, O thou mine heir, O thou mine heir of Naples and Milan, what strange fish has made his meal on thee? Because he imagines his heir, which is his son, is drowned. He imagines, not the kid isn't really drowned, but he thinks he is, and he imagines fish is eating him. And Francisco says, Sir, he may live, like maybe he's alive. I saw him beat the surges under him and ride upon their backs. Well, he trod the water, whose enmity he flung aside, and breasted the surge most swollen that met him. So he was swimming pretty good. Maybe he didn't drown. His bold head above the contentious waves he kept, and oared himself with his good arms in lusty stroke to the shore, that o'er his wave-worn bias bowed, and stooping to relieve him, I doubt not he came alive to land. So this guy's like, maybe it's not so bad. Maybe your son didn't drown. He was swimming pretty good. No, he's gone. Because Alonso's depressed, and he just thinks his kid is dead. Sir, and then we get this. This is mean, because Sebastian's a fucking asshole. And Sebastian says, Sir, you may thank yourself for this great loss, that would not bless our Europe with your daughter, but rather lose her to an African, where she at least is banished from your eye, who hath cause to wet the grief on it. And Alonso says, prithee peace, meaning like, be quiet, you're being really mean. What Sebastian says is horrible. But it's because the king is grieving. The king thinks his son is dead. He thinks they're all going to die on this island. And Sebastian makes it worse. Sebastian says, you may thank yourself for this great loss, meaning, oh, you're sad your kid died? It's your fault for marrying your daughter off to an African. You see the same kind of racism in Othello. You see it here too. He says that you would not bless our Europe with your daughter, but rather lose her to an African. So this is again, you see the kind of racism here. But he's saying like this is really, I don't know why you're so depressed. It's your fucking fault that we're shipwrecked on this island because you insisted your daughter marry with this African king. Now here's where something gets this is where it gets kind of tricky. You got to remember that back in these days, king's daughters, king's sons, they didn't really marry for love. They married because if your country wanted to have a good relationship with another country, then you have your kid, your princess, marry their prince, or their king or whatever. And then your two families are connected, which means your countries are connected, which means your power is expanded. Because instead of, you used to be two countries, but if you have let's say you have a king and he's enemies with another king. If they can get the kids to marry each other, then they're all one big family, and they're not going to kill each other because they're all in-laws. And also they're going to share things. It's going to be money, trade, goods are going to go back and forth. And so the fucked up thing about this is that these weddings between kings and princes and princesses, these are they're about consolidating power. They are about empire building. You see how it's similar to the colonialists who go into a country and take over and control the natives? The king here is got his daughter marrying an African prince and African king in a totally other country, in Carthage, where Dido was. And remember, Aeneas, the whole reason. So like, we talked about how Prospero is similar to an invader who goes into a country and takes over and becomes the king, right? Becomes the ruler of the land, just like Prospero has slaves. And a little bit like Christopher Columbus coming over and taking over from all of the Native Americans who lived here. And then we have it again with Aeneas, who was leaving his country to go to a new country to defeat a bunch of barbarians and found an empire. But in this play, the king in the play, the character, he's doing the same kind of empire building by using his daughter. He says, I'm going to marry my daughter off to this African king, and that's going to make my family more powerful. And here's the and that's why the guys are like, listen, it's your fault. You're the one that wanted to marry her to an African king. That's why we're shipwrecked, because you're power hungry. And then we get an even sadder detail. Sebastian says, you were kneeled to and importuned otherwise, meaning people asked you not to make her marry this dude. All of us, we all tried to stop this marriage. And the fair soul herself weighed between loathness and obedience, and which end of the beam should bow. We have lost your son, I fear, forever. Milan and Naples have more widows in them than this business is making than we bring to comfort them. The fault's your own. Now, this detail here is incredibly depressing. The fair soul herself, that's the daughter Claribel, weighed between loathness and obedience, meaning she hated her new, loathness is hatred. She hated her new husband. She didn't want to get married to this guy. Her dad forced her to get married to this guy for political reasons, because he wanted his kingdom and this other kingdom connected. It's political, economic power. He essentially sold his daughter to an African king so that he could get power and empire. So you see Prospero getting power over Caliban, having his own little kingdom on the island, Aeneas sailing away to found the Roman Empire, and the king in this play, Alonso, who is sold his daughter to someone she didn't want to marry, so that he could increase his power. And everybody told him not to. Everybody said, she doesn't want to marry this guy. Don't make her marry this person. And he made her marry this king, and now they're shipwrecked, and so it's completely his fault. Okay, and I'll pick that up in the next video.